On the cover this week in the Washington Examiner magazine, Drones and the Future of Warfare. And I'm joined today by Washington Examiner's senior writer for national security, Jamie McIntyre. Jamie, you've written this piece and it takes a look at what happened in Ukraine when Ukraine launched, I think what surprised a lot of people, their capability to do this with this attack on Russia. Unpack a little bit for us what happened.
So Jim, anybody who follows what's going on with warfare in the military knows that there's a revolution involving the use of drone warfare. But this episode in Ukraine, June 1st, was, I would say, it's like the evolution of the revolution. It was ingenious, it was creative, and I think almost every account of it used the word audacious. Mm-hmm. And basically what they did was they, in an operation that was meticulously planned over a year and a half, they snuck in over 100 drones in containers or little things that look like cabins or mobile homes on the back of trucks, stationed them all around deep into Russia. Some of the drivers who drove them didn't know what they were driving. And they had these drones hidden in the top of them in a separate container, and they were able to pop the roof off of these containers by remote control, fly the drones from thousands of miles away in Ukraine, and attack 4 or 5 different Russian air bases. And depending on who you believe, they either destroyed about 20 of Russia's long-range bombers, some of these nuclear-capable bombers, so it's part of their triad, or Ukraine claims that they got over 40 of them, mm-hmm. causing $7 billion of damage. It's, in Russia, they started referring to it as Russia's Pearl Harbor,
sure.
Which I think is a good comparison because it really took them completely by surprise. But also, like Pearl Harbor, it's not likely to be the decisive battle of the war. Pearl Harbor didn't win the war for Japan,
right.
But it sure was a wake-up call, and this was a big wake-up call.
So what do you think it does in terms of the Russia-Ukraine war? Does it maybe strengthen Ukraine's hand at the negotiating table? Does it set any of those types of talks back further?
Well, so I wrote in the article on the cover that, Trump dressed Zelensky down when he was at the White House and said he didn't have the cards. Mm-hmm. And at the time, of course, Volodymyr Zelensky knew quite well that this operation was going to be sprung. So, as I said, it turned out he did have some cards up his sleeve, and in fact, one of them was a Trump card. But what I think it does is it sends a couple of big messages. One is that Ukraine is not in any mood to just surrender. There's a lot of fight in them, and Ukraine, of course, has been consistently underestimated from the very beginning of the war, because, of course, they're overmatched by a superpower. They're a country that's, has just 1/4 of the population that Russia has. But it also sent a message to President Trump that they do have some tricks up their sleeve. They do have things they can do. And since that attack, by the way, there have been some other pretty notable attacks. The Ukrainians were able to shoot down one of Russia's top-of-the-line fighter jets over Russian territory with one of the F-16s that they've been provided by the Allies. They conducted a successful attack on a logistics train where they destroyed a number of tanks that were being taken to the front line. So they're battling back. So I think it sends that message as well, that people who think, well, they're losing the war and they're going to lose. It's going to be a tough battle. And I think that people who are fighting for their freedom and their sovereignty and don't want to be taken over by Russia, they're battling pretty hard.
What does this mean, the prevalence of drones, the emergence of drones, what does this mean for warfare beyond the Russia-Ukraine conflict? Does this have implications for major powers like the United States or China?
Well, there's been a lot of debate in recent years about whether the United States has been slow to recognize that some of these big, exquisite, expensive weapon systems that we're spending money on, aircraft carriers and top-of-the-line fighter jets, is that really where we should be spending most of our money? Or should we be developing more drones, these cheap disposable drones like Ukraine used, and specifically counter-drone warfare? Because You have to think about this. If Ukraine was able to sneak in over 100 drones into a police state like Russia, how hard would it be for somebody to get a rental truck and sneak drones in next somewhere near a U.S. military base? And you recall, just wasn't that long ago, we were all concerned about Chinese companies buying land too close to U.S. military bases where they thought they might be spying or they might be sabotage.
Right.
But now you can imagine with any terrorist who could build these cheap drones in their garage and launch them into a base. Our bases, our planes, many of these bases are out on the tarmac in the same way that the Russian planes were out there vulnerable to drone attack. I think it's going to create a reassessment of where we should be spending our money in order to protect the assets that we have at home, and also how we might launch a war in the future. Taiwan has to be looking at what Ukraine has done with drones, and Ukraine now produces an enormous amount of indigenous drones, these small quadcopters, and they have to be thinking we need to be doing the same thing. We need to have that kind of drone capability if we're going to deter China from either blockading or trying to take over Taiwan. So I think it has enormous implications.
Thank you, Jamie. If you're following us on YouTube, you can read Jamie's full article by clicking here on the digital magazine.